Hello everyone, my name is Svetlana, and I am 29 years old. I presently live in Moscow, Russia, with my husband and little son. Despite my outward appearance as a successful woman with a happy family and solid work, I harbor secrets that I have never dared to share with anyone. Today, I chose to open up and share my life narrative, which has been filled with hurt, blunders, and indescribable cravings. This is not only a narrative about the past, but also a confrontation with my inner self and the mistakes that have caused me to live in anguish and struggle. I am not seeking pity or pardon. I merely aim to provide you with a sense of tranquility through this narrative, and I sincerely hope that the words I'll utter will resonate deeply with you. So, if you are willing, please join me in telling a narrative that I have never dared to tell, a story for which I have yet to forgive myself. My upbringing started with a catastrophe, a terrible wound in my psyche that I will never forget. That year, I was just 7 years old, an innocent child who thought the world was full of love and fun. My family, father, mother, 4-year-old brother, and I decided to go together to a little village outside Moscow. It seemed like a typical trip, but it turned out to be our last together. I recall the soft sunlight streaming through the vehicle window that day, my brother's sharp laughter as he recounted innocent stories, and my mother's compassionate gaze as she glanced down at us. My father sat in the front, tightly gripping the driving wheel and occasionally cracking a little smile when he heard jokes. I felt a sense of protection, believing that nothing could harm my family, yet life is full of unexpected challenges. Everything changed abruptly on the way back. I just remember the screaming of brakes, the thunderous sound of metal colliding, and everything falling into darkness. I awoke to the scent of antiseptic and the cold white light of the hospital. A nurse gazed down at me, her eyes overflowing with sympathy. At the moment, I had no idea what was going on, but I soon recognized that my parents and younger brother were not present. When the doctor came to the bed and softly explained that they had died, I felt depleted. That moment caused my entire universe to collapse. At the time, I couldn't comprehend the anguish of loss. I just felt a peculiar emptiness, like if something vital had vanished forever. But when I returned to the house that had once been pleasant and full of laughter, reality hit me hard. No more mom greeting me at the door, no more younger brother running to show me his drawings, and no more father sitting in the chair reading a book every evening. The formerly warm chambers became frigid and terrifyingly quiet. I sat in bed, looking at the black ceiling, and understood for the first time that my life had altered drastically. Nobody held my hand to lead me, and no one comforted me when I sobbed. From that point on, my childhood was no longer a pleasant path, but rather a lengthy, lonely trip marked by unrelenting sorrow. After the accident, my grandparents adopted me and put me into a little apartment in the heart of Moscow. The flat was small, but it was always warm, with classical music playing on the radio and the scent of chamomile tea poured by my grandfather every morning. My grandparents did everything they could to make my existence full of love and affection. My grandfather told me tales about his childhood. My grandma made me the most beautiful sweaters for the winter, and they always tried to make me feel like I still had a family. Despite their serious and earnest efforts, they were unable to fill the void in my heart. Their love was like a nice towel over the wound, yet it stayed there, burning and unable to cure. I had lost more than my loved ones. I had lost the belief that the world was secure. Since I was a youngster, loneliness had become etched in my spirit, like a quiet friend I could never leave. There were nights when everything was silent. I lay in bed, staring out the tiny window at the pale yellow lights of the city, wondering why I was the only one who had survived. Was it a gift? A blessing I should treasure? Or was it a punishment from fate, forcing me to live but eternally suffer the sorrow and emptiness? Those unsolved questions continued to whirl in my head, weighty and tormented. I started to feel like a stranger in my own life. Although my grandparents constantly attempted to make amends, I couldn't shake the impression that I was adrift amid people and parts that couldn't fit together. My life seemed to have been taken away from me the instant the accident occurred. It became a painful trip, and I was left helpless to see my own loss. As the years passed, I matured, putting on a tough front to conceal the profound scars inside. People around me typically described me as a strong, independent girl, but they had no idea that inside me were numerous fissures, remnants of a childhood ripped apart by tragedy. I learned to hold my equilibrium on the tumultuous surface of life, but deep inside, every stride felt wobbly. When I reached maturity, I realized I couldn't continue to live under my grandparents' protection. I needed to forge my own route, even though I knew it would be challenging. After several days of deliberation and hardship, I chose to apply to Bauman Moscow State Technical University, one of Russia's most prominent universities. It was not an easy decision. I knew no one at school and had no relationships to rely on. Although the learning climate there was considered to be incredibly rigorous, I refused to back down. I was determined to demonstrate my independence and prove that I was not a helpless individual bound by the pain of my past. This was not just a decision to study, but also an assertion to myself that I could change my fate and surpass the limitations that life had imposed on me. The first days of university were not enjoyable. The bustle of life and the pressure of studying led me to become lost among strangers in the long halls. Every evening, I sat alone in my modest rented room, feeling as if I were fighting the entire world. Instead of allowing loneliness to overwhelm me, I turned it into determination. I told myself I had gone this far and couldn't give up. Every time I passed a challenging exam or finished a project, I felt a glimmer of optimism in my heart. I gradually came to feel that, while I couldn't heal the old wounds, I could still create a new future in which I wouldn't have to live in the shadows of the past. At university, I met Andrei, a kid who drew my attention from the start. He was tall and attractive, with sparkling eyes and a confident smile. But what impressed me the most was his knowledge and poise. Andrei was unlike anyone I'd met before. He drew me in not only with his appearance but also with the way he spoke, constantly listening, comprehending, and delivering interesting ideas. Initially, we were simply buddies. Our relationship developed spontaneously, either through group discussions or when he assisted me in solving tough math issues. Andrei was very patient while explaining things, and his eyes shone when I finally comprehended the situation. His devotion and excitement pleased me, and I looked forward to his visits to study or simply talk. Then one day, I found that whenever I saw him, my heart raced quicker. It was a peculiar feeling, both scared and lovely, one I had never had before. But I wasn't sure how Andrei felt, so I didn't say anything. Our connection would most likely have continued at the level of friendship, if not for an unforeseen incident. One afternoon, while sitting in the little kitchen with my grandmother, she suddenly said with a cheeky and slightly troubled expression, "Do you have a boyfriend? You're an adult female. You should think about it." I was perplexed, not knowing how to respond. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to admit that I still hadn't met anybody significant. In my perplexity, The name Andrei unexpectedly came out of my mouth, and so the story started. My grandma was ecstatic and wanted to meet my beau right away. I had no choice but to approach Andrei with a flushed face and a hushed voice. "Can you assist me with something?" I told her that. "You're my boyfriend, and she wants to meet you." I expected him to say no, but Andrei just chuckled and said, "As long as you don't make me act too well. I'm willing, so we'll put on the perfect play together." Andrei arrived at my residence with a courteous and calm approach. He not only delighted my grandma, but also startled me. Every phrase and action he took seemed so genuine that I forgot I was watching a play. My grandma, with bright eyes, continued nodding and applauding Andrei as I sat next to him, ashamed but yet feeling a weird warmth seeping into my heart. Andrei glanced at me as he left, a smile lingering on his lips. "I've finished my part. However, it appears that your grandma truly likes me." I didn't know how to respond, so I simply smiled back. Our connection has changed since that day. There were certain things that didn't need to be mentioned, but I had the impression that an invisible rope was steadily tightening between us, making it hard for either of us to return to our previous state. I assumed that after the drama of meeting my grandma, Andrea and I would be able to resume our close friendship. But shortly after that encounter, everything began to shift, and I could feel it too. Andrea brought me late one night to a modest cafe with aged wooden tables and warm yellow lighting. He ordered a couple of glasses of wine, and we spoke as usual, but this time the mood was different, close, but with veiled significance. Andrea grinned an unusual smile and fixed me with a deep glance, making my heart race. Andrea did not take me home after supper, as he usually does. Instead, he recommended that we go elsewhere for a while. Okay? Consider it my way of saying thank you for assisting you in doing your job flawlessly in front of your grandma. I didn't think much of it and just nodded in agreement. We arrived at a tiny motel where dim lighting created a warm yet private environment. I don't recall what occurred next, but I do know that as the door closed, I crossed a line I had never considered before. This was my first time, an event so unpleasant and weird that it is impossible to explain. I felt as if I was being drawn into a completely new universe where emotions, instincts, and curiosity had mingled into a cyclone with no way out. Although my pulse was pounding and my intellect was perplexed, my body appeared to defy reason, unable to resist Andrei's allure. After that night, I understood Andrei and I had developed a nameless, ambiguous, but powerful bond that I couldn't resist. We were not lovers. He had never expressed his love for me, and I had never had the confidence to ask. But every time I encountered him, his eyes, grin, and the way he murmured enticing things into my ear left me unable to resist. Andrei was a multifaceted man, intriguing, confident, and handsome. He was like a fire that might both warm and burn me at any time. And while knowing that this connection had no end, I couldn't stop myself from flowing into it like a moth, being both enamored and tortured by my own unidentified feelings. The murky relationship with Andrea persisted throughout my college years, like an undercurrent that drew me away in ways I couldn't comprehend. We kept seeing one another, still engrossed in an undefined desire, but the relationship never became apparent or long-lasting. I lived in a state of conflict, fascinated but empty when he went without making any commitments. Then one day, I met Mikhail. Mikhail brought a tranquility to my life that I had never known before. Mikhail was extremely different from Andrei. He was compassionate, intellectual, and a strong believer in Russian Orthodox Christianity. Perhaps this disparity was what drew me to him in the first place. Mikhail never hurried me, put me under pressure, or made me feel as if I had to act like someone else. He always respected me, from the smallest details, such as my own tastes, to the quiet periods I needed to reflect. With Mikhail, I felt like I could breathe, let go of my tough exterior, and unveil my actual self, complete with fractures and wounds. Mikhail proposed to me after we had known one another for several months. It wasn't a showy proposal with flowers and music, but rather straightforward and real, and it moved me deeply. He stated that he intended to establish a house in which I would never feel lonely again. Those comments choked me up because, even though I didn't say it, I knew that was exactly what I had been hoping for. A sense of stability, someone to back me in life. Mikhail's wedding fulfilled my dreams. I was dressed in spotless white, standing in front of the altar with flickering candles and the choir singing. His eyes were filled with love and trust, making me feel as if the entire world was on my side. When we spoke wedding vows, I honestly felt that my life had come to a close. Mikhail was the long-awaited goal, the one who might provide me with the tranquility I had never felt. At the time, I believed that all of the anguish and upheaval of the past belonged to another chapter in my life, one that I was ready to end and begin anew, more complete and happier. But Andrei did not leave my life. When I returned to work at the Eat Company, he emerged as a ghost from the past, haunting me indefinitely. At first, it was merely casual encounters in the corridors, his gaze deep and intense, shattering the veneer I attempted to construct for myself. Then followed brief but profound discussions, murmurs that appeared innocent, but brought back memories I was trying to ignore. I told myself it couldn't happen. I was Mikhail's wife, and he had given me all the love and trust I had ever wanted. Andrei, however, was like a smoldering fire. Every time he came, my rationality wavered. I attempted to resist. I immersed myself in my job, avoided his gaze, and shut off any communication. But when Andrei arrived, his deep voice caused me to lose track of where I was going. In only one night and a few drinks, everything I had promised myself was distorted. In a moment, all barriers fell. I lost who I was, and I forgot that my wedding band was still on my finger. For the first time since my marriage, I crossed the boundary between right and wrong, rushing into Andrei's arms like a lost soul seeking redemption. Every time, I felt terrible and powerless to draw away. Andrei evoked deep feelings in me that Mikhail did not, creating a hazardous desire as if he had the key to unlocking a part of me that I did not completely comprehend. I knew I was playing with fire, and that each step farther into this illicit connection meant moving away from Mikhail, the person I actually loved. But Andrei's magnetism was too strong, like a black tsunami sweeping in and swallowing me, drowning me in both pleasure and tremendous terror. I hoped for and dreaded the day when the truth would be revealed, yet I couldn't help but see myself as doomed by my own decisions. A year after our marriage, I gave birth to my first kid, which should have been the greatest time of my life. Looking into his pure eyes, I felt as if I were confronting my lost innocence and purity. He was a part of Mikhail, the embodiment of his love for me. But at that time, a horrible shame sprung up and grasped my heart. I'd deceived him. I had betrayed the family I had hoped to create, the home I had longed for to alleviate the agony of the past. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that things had changed, that I was a mother, and that I couldn't go on living in selfishness and errors, Andrei's magnetism was like an invisible cord that bound me to this illicit connection. Every time I watched Mikhail carefully cradling the infant, his eyes full of love, I felt myself fall further into the pit of agony. He deserved the best, and I was hiding a secret that, if revealed, would entirely demolish the world he had fought so hard to create. I convinced myself that keeping my distance from Andrew would put a stop to it all, but reality was never that easy. Andrew was still present, like a horrible aspect of my existence that I couldn't forget. Every time we unexpectedly crossed paths, a glimpse was enough to render all of my attempts futile. I hated myself for not being strong enough to escape the vortex of temptation, but I couldn't deny that there was something between me and him that I'd never felt with anyone else, an intense and deadly desire that I couldn't resist. I was a mother and a traitor. I lived in 2 parallel universes, each containing a portion of myself and tugging me in opposing ways. The more I attempted to separate from Andre, the more I recognized that our link was more than simply sexual desire. It was something deeper, more strong. I was unable to totally flee, so I continued to dwell in an unavoidable paradox, both pained and intrigued by my own follies. Every time I entered the church with Mikhail, I couldn't help but feel as if I was standing in front of an unseen court. The beautiful light from the stained glass windows gave a solemn and spiritual aura over everything. But for me, the light simply illuminated the darkest parts of my psyche. I stood by Mikhail, listening to his prayers and whispered words of reverence, and my heart was heavy with a sense of unworthiness. As I knelt before the altar, I clasped my hands in prayer, partially closing my eyes to keep the tears from falling. I asked God for forgiveness, for Him to pardon my misdeeds, but deep down, I knew these were only flimsy excuses. Andrew's betrayals continued to repeat themselves. It was like a vortex from which I couldn't escape. There were long evenings when the entire family had fallen asleep, and I lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, contemplating confessing to Mikhail. I wanted to tell him everything, confront my crimes, and be free of this crushing sensation. But that idea was swiftly stifled by terror. I was terrified to see the change in his eyes, worried that the truth would destroy the love and trust he had shown me. More than everything, I was scared of losing him, the family we had created, the guy who loved me with all his heart, and the young kid I want to shield from the pains of life. So whenever the notion of confessing appeared in my mind, I pushed myself to gulp it down and bury it deep inside my spirit. I tried to tell myself that if I stayed silent, I could make apologies by loving Mikhail more and performing my responsibilities as a wife and mother. But every time I stood next to him in the church, surrounded by sanctity, I couldn't help but feel judged by a greater authority. I lived in a never-ending battle between the desire to redeem myself and the fear of losing everything. And I pondered if God would ever forgive someone like me, who had violated the love and trust of the one he loved the most. Now, as I sit calmly reflecting on my life, I can't help but understand that it was a succession of bad decisions I made and temptations I couldn't resist. I loved my spouse and son more than I could ever put into words. However, love alone was unable to obliterate Andrew's memories. They were like wounds in my memory, unhealable and memorable, serving only to remind me of my mistakes. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face and hear his words reverberate. Feel the magnetism that I can't define. Those recollections, while unpleasant, still have a fascination that I can't shake. I live in 2 worlds, one in which I strive to be the perfect wife and mother, and another in which I try to bury shattered bits of the past. But I know I can't keep living like this. The secrets and pain have become a burden, smothering my spirit. I can only hope that one day I will be strong enough to overcome the ghosts of the past and live a truly pure and honest life, free of the conflict between what I have and what I have lost. This is my narrative, a confession from the depths of my heart, not to seek forgiveness from others, but to rediscover myself. I write these lines to confront my true self, to look directly at the mistakes I have made, and to hope that, even if only slightly, I can begin the journey of redemption, not only with the people I care about, but also with myself. I'd want to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who has taken the time to hear my tale. Opening up to discuss the dark elements of life is difficult, but I know that being heard is a valuable gift, and I am glad for it. Life is sometimes full of mistakes and regrets. However, the understanding and empathy of those around us will help us move forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead. My story is not intended to justify or seek forgiveness, but rather to help me face myself. And thanks to your attentiveness, I feel as if I have relieved some of the burden. Thank you for taking the time, patience, and heart to walk me through each line of confidences. I hope you always find peace and happiness in life,